Matthew chapter 19. And it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these sayings, he departed from Galilee, and came into the coasts of Judea beyond Jordan. And great multitudes followed him, and he healed from there. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. His disciples say unto him, If the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. But he said unto them, All man cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Then were there brought unto him little children, that he should put his hands on them, and pray, and the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, Suffer little children, and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them, and departed thence. And behold, one came and said unto him, Good master, what good thing shall I do, that I may have eternal life? And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. He saith unto him, Which? Jesus said, Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, honor thy father and thy mother, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The young man saith unto him, All these things have I kept from my youth up, what lack I yet? Jesus said unto him, If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, Verily I say unto you, that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. And I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard it, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, Who then can be saved? But Jesus beheld them, and said unto them, With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Then answered Peter, and said unto him, Behold, we have forsaken all, and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? And Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me, in the regeneration when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Matthew chapter 19 begins with the Pharisees, yet again. They're like a bad infection that won't go away, or like a parasite. And they constantly were behind the scenes. I'm sure they had all sorts of think tanks and discussions behind closed doors, lots of hand rubbing going on, trying to come up with ways to catch Jesus and do what they eventually did without having any reason to do it. They always wanted to kill Jesus because they weren't ready to accept that the Messiah was there. They've denied the Messiah. Jesus came. God sent his only begotten Son, and the Jews of the time who didn't convert then, they weren't ready for it. And it just reminds me of today, how it makes zero sense to me how, especially in America, I feel like there's this it's like sickening the way that 501c3 churches, they treat Jewish people like they're special just because of the way that they were born. And that goes against everything. And especially the fact that if you're a Jew today, that means that you don't believe that Jesus is the Christ, is the Messiah. How does that, what do these preachers think? Do they think that Jewish people go to heaven just because they were born Jewish? I guess this is where I'll tell this a story. I know one Jew guy. I mean, I know more than one, but this one in particular, he said that these ultra religious people would come to him because they had a version of the Bible with Hebrew or something, and he said that they would come to him and ask him to read the Bible to them in Hebrew because they wanted to hear the word of God in what they thought was, I don't know, a more legitimate language, which I don't agree with. But anyways, the point of the story, this guy I know, he said that he was just making up random Hebrew words, and the Christians were like acting like they were hearing the most amazing spiritual things just because it was coming out of the mouth of some Jew. Honestly, you just get to a point where you get over it and you think it's funny that 99.99% of the population thinks that the stuff that I'm saying right now is probably the most horrendously offensive stuff, and you stop caring at a certain point. You realize that most of the world they can't get past the being able to criticize who they're controlled by. So anyways, getting that out of the way, the Pharisees of the time, they were asking Jesus if it was lawful to put away your wife for every cause. So to me, it seemed like they were asking him, is a man allowed to divorce his wife for any reason that a man wants? Basically asking if the woman is his property. And Jesus' response, it's always interesting when Jesus does this. In my opinion, Jesus was the best at answering questions with other questions, or if somebody asked you a question, coming at it from an angle that people weren't expecting. Like these people come and ask Jesus about divorcement, and his first thing is to go and start referencing Adam and Eve. I just love that whenever stuff like that, it just shows the type of perspective that Jesus had. I mean, obviously, that's a given, but it's just, whenever I read stuff like that, it's like, oh man, Jesus was just always on another level. So Jesus references Adam and Eve and how God made them male and female, and together they become one flesh. I also think that Jesus is making an argument for monogamy here, that humans were created to be monogamous. And it's also very interesting. There's something very beautiful about a man and a woman coming together and being brought together by God. It really feels like that sometimes. Like I really feel like God put me and my wife together, and nothing is going to take it apart. And we're one now, and it's kind of weird. Haven't really fully internalized that aspect, but it really is a great thing that, and these days it's hard to even talk about love and romance and marriage, and it's just become such a clown freak show at this point. But so many things, I think, can be taken away from this part of the Bible. It's just really interesting. Okay, so male and female become one flesh, and knowing what goes on today, if that's different when a man and a woman are together, or a free martin and a woman, what are the differences? And anyways, Jesus actually does go on to explain things about eunuchs, which is really interesting. This is probably one of the most interesting standalone verses when it comes to a huge topic that was part of my waking up to all of this stuff, transvestigation. So the disciples, it's really interesting. So Jesus basically says, you cannot divorce your wife except for fornication unless she's cheating on you. And I think it's really funny that the response of the disciples are like, oh, well, then why would a man ever get married then? I think that's hilarious. I think it's funny because the Jews do have like all sorts of, man, when you start to learn about Jew culture, a lot of stuff makes a lot of sense. They have contracts. When Jewish people go into a marriage, they write up contracts. Talk about how romantic is that? Anyways, When the disciples respond, well, why would anyone get married then? It's not good to get married if you can't divorce your wife for any reason that you ever would want to. And then Jesus responds with one of the most interesting responses. And so this is where, when you're just sitting back and you're just reading the Bible and you just go walk through it and you're just reading start to finish, you can read Matthew in a couple hours. It's not that big of a deal. You're probably going to miss out on a lot of stuff, though. And this is one of those things. Jesus just explained divorcement. And then the disciples said, well, nobody should get married then. That sucks. And then Jesus's response to that is talking about eunuchs. And so Jesus starts talking about eunuchs and the different types of eunuchs. And so what's interesting here is that Jesus mentions eunuchs made in the mother's womb. I actually just read something earlier today on Reddit. I guess it's worth pointing out how they were talking about some royal stuff. You know how there was always sexual scandal going on with royal stuff, saying that they have weird jaws and they have strange proportions. They'd get their portraits done differently than what they looked like because they looked crazy. And now we know about all this trans stuff going on, the eugenics program, trying to make free martins the norm, and guarded bloodlines, things like that. Anyways, it was just interesting that I was reading today and the topic of physmosis came up. It was some story about a royal person trying to be slandered by fake pornography, and I don't know. It's just weird. History's full of strange things. King Tut has female hips. Why is that a thing that people talk about? Why do we know that kings of the past had physmosis? Like, why is that a thing? Why do we know about their junk? And anyways, there's just a lot with the eunuch thing. I just think it's funny, though. So the disciples say we shouldn't marry because we can't divorce. And then Jesus talks about eunuchs and then says that anyone who can't receive it, or let anyone receive it who can receive it. So putting all this together, I think that Jesus's points were, the disciples are saying, oh man, that sucks. You can't just divorce your wife because she burnt the toast. And then Jesus is saying, well, you could be a eunuch if you don't like what I'm talking about. And so I think that's really something that's really easy to not even understand, why Jesus is bringing up eunuchs all of a sudden. And in my opinion, I think that's why he's saying this stuff. If you don't like the rules about marriage, go be one of those eunuchs. And I think it's interesting that he specifically mentions eunuchs made in the mother's womb. And yeah, big topic, obviously. In this chapter, we see that children and women were second-class citizens. I wonder at what age you started becoming a respectable citizen. Probably depended if you're a boy or a girl. But here Jesus tells us that the kingdom of heaven is, he just told us in the previous chapter, or the one before that, I forget, that the kingdom of heaven it's like being born again, like being a child. It's like we're all going to be on the same foot. Nobody's going to... So what this reminds me of, when Jesus talked about it in this context, how as such, it's going to be as such in the kingdom of heaven, just with respect to the context that was going on. You have all these people that are going around like they're the most pious and they've been living their life the most amazing, and they have all this to show for it. And this even goes into later, the parable that Jesus talks about later. These people spend their whole life basically showing how amazing they are and pious and righteous. And Jesus sets them down and says, that's not what heaven is, not those people with the fancy robes and who are doing all the most elaborate things. It's like this, like the children. And it's not going to be so to bring this into the parable at the end of the chapter it's not going to be the people that have been spending their whole lives being the most pious the whole time and all that. They're not going to come out on top. At the end of the day, everybody gets a penny. And in fact, Jesus even says that, in fact, the way it is, the last are going to be first and the first are going to be last. It actually was those 11th hour people that got paid first. And notice that the 11th hour people, it wasn't like in the parable. The people who were hired at the 11th hour, the reason that they were still there is because they said that they weren't hired. They were looking for work. They wanted to work. They weren't goofing off, going and doing stuff. It's just, I mean, I liken it to myself. I think I'm an 11th hourer. I spent almost all my life agnostic and doing things that I would never do now. And I only woke up to Jesus a few years ago. And so it would be like people who were born Christian being bitter at me. Oh, you got to go have that life with all that stuff that you now regret. And anyways, I think that's what Jesus is getting at here, that we're all going to be like children. We're all going to be on the same pace. Children don't have all the different levels. When we get to heaven, it's not going to be a bragging contest. Oh, my fruit tree bore 80 fruit, therefore I'm better than you. It's not going to be like that. Kids, everybody's a friend. You're all... So that's what it's going to be like. In this chapter, Jesus specifically mentions various of the commandments, of God's commandments. And it's interesting here, he doesn't list all of the 10 commandments. Murder, adultery, theft, false witness, honor your father and your mother, love your neighbor as yourself. And I guess the only thing I'd say here that I didn't see was mentioning idolatry. Seems like a big thing that could be mentioned here. And lastly, this chapter ends with Jesus talking about rich people and how hard it is for rich people to get to heaven. And I think it's funny because a lot of people don't agree with this today, but Jesus told it to us. And the way that they react, the way that the disciples react at this point is very important, because they say they're totally taken aback at this when Jesus says that hardly shall a rich man enter into the kingdom of heaven. He says it's like trying to fit a camel through the eye of a needle. And the disciples say, who can be saved then? Because that was their thought process back then, that rich people were loved by God and therefore saved. So that's just what I always pay attention to, is Jesus is flipping everything on the table. It's not the rich guy that's going to heaven. It's the little guy, the underdog. I guess it also has something to say, if you find yourself in the position of being a rich guy, yeah, what does that say? You might have something to do with your life or with your riches. Sell it all. Start following Jesus. I quit my job 4 years ago, and I don't regret it at all. That's it for this video. God bless everyone.